Good afternoon and welcome to today's Energy Seminar. You know, when Rachel and Noel and I put together the program for these seminars, we usually try to get a good range of speakers, both for the students and our more general audience, which would include people who work on energy, people who work on environment and sustainability, people who work with big companies, small companies, NGOs, public, private. And therefore, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Winnie Lam, who has essentially done it all and is now going to give you a talk about not each individual position she's had, but her career and sustainability, which goes through the two jobs she has listed, being the Director of Sustainability and Design Engineering at Nike, and off another job that seems really, really hard these days, and that is to be the lead of the data center and sustainability at Google. She also, one thing that caught a lot of our attention, developed a cooperative public-private group that works on wildlife prohibiting, ending wildlife trafficking between the World Wildlife Federation and major technology companies, I assume including Google. So with that said, welcome, Winnie. We're very happy to welcome you. Thanks for sharing your story with us today.
Well, thank you so much, John. Thank you for having me. You've heard a little bit about my background, and so I want to learn a little bit about you. So the topic of this lecture is, what should I do with my life in sustainability? So I want to get a show of hands. Who here knows what you want to do with your life related to sustainability? Okay, we have one person here. We have another gentleman here. Would you like to share with folks what you want to do with your life in sustainability?
So I was thinking maybe like energy consulting.
Energy consulting. Awesome. Okay, cool. Other folks want to share what your life plans are related to sustainability? Okay.
Life is a big word, but next steps, industrial decarbonization, later stage startups.
Later stage startups with industrial decarbonization. Awesome. Love it. Okay, I'm going to ask a slightly easier question that you may have more of an answer to. I want to hear what kind of organization you may be interested in working in. So whether it's a startup, whether it's a bigger company working on sustainability inside a bigger company, a nonprofit, et cetera. Okay, so let's get a show of hands. Who wants to work in a sustainability-related startup? Okay, a handful. Who wants to work on sustainability inside a bigger company? Okay, a handful as well. Who wants to do academia and research? Nobody? Okay, a few. Okay, thank you. Who wants to do nonprofits and government? A number of you, all right. I feel like it's almost an equal mix amongst all these things. Okay, last one. Who has no idea whatsoever what they want to do? Okay, an equal mix. Okay, well, we're gonna have a good time here. So what I'm going to do is, in the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through a few questions to think about as you think through your career choices. And as John said, a lot of my experience has to do with the corporate side. But let me first, before we dive in, share why we're having this talk in the first place. This is the talk that I wish somebody had given me 15 years ago when I decided to pursue a career in sustainability. The space was a lot less developed at that point. It was really nascent. And so, a lot of things have changed, but this is the talk that I wish I had. So a little bit about where I was 15 years ago. At that point, I was earlier on in my career. I had graduated from a top engineering school. At the time, I was working at Google, so I had several years of work experience behind me. I was working on the search engine, working on online ads, and, been there since the company went public. Really highly coveted job. I should have had everything. I should have been really happy, really excited. But what I felt was that I was just so excited about all the other things that didn't have to do with my day job. I was doing all these side hustles, side projects, saving the animals that John was talking about, etc. And so I was like, okay, you know what? I got to do something about this. Got to do a full-time job in sustainability. But what was I going to be? I had no idea. The field was pretty early on. And so as I was navigating through all these choices, I've learned a few lessons the hard way, which hopefully I'll help you think through a little bit so that you don't have to learn them firsthand. All right, so the 5 questions. The first one is, do I want to work in an organization where sustainability is core to the mission of that organization? And so here are a few examples. On the first column there, on the left side, these are examples of organizations where sustainability is core to what they do. So for instance, in the clothing space, Patagonia is an example that comes to mind where saving the planet is really core to their mission. In the nonprofit space, of course, I'm familiar with the World Wildlife Fund. There are many, many other amazing nonprofits that are also very much dedicated to climate, water, sustainability, etc. There are startups like plant-based food companies. Impossible Foods is one of them. Anyway, there are many companies, many organizations where the key focus is around sustainability. Now, on the right-hand side of this chart, there are many organizations where sustainability is important, but is not part and parcel, is not the end-all for why they exist. So, for instance, I worked at Google, where sustainability is a big priority, but it's not everything that it did. It's not everything that the mission was centered around. Self-driving cars using EVs definitely has a sustainability component, but it's not the only thing it does. Or public transit agencies, again, benefit sustainability, but not the end-all. So why is this question important? Why this distinction? And the reason for that is because the feel for what it's like to work in these environments is very different. In that first category, where sustainability is core to the mission, you can feel it in the camaraderie with your colleagues. So you're going to feel like, hey, these are all my people. We care about the same things. We're all marching forward. We share a similar vision. And it feels amazing, right? To have people who think similar to you, who are similarly passionate about the things that you care about. It feels amazing. On the other side, it can also be really amazing, but in different ways, because you could feel like you're making change that wouldn't otherwise happen if you did not exist. And that's a very different kind of satisfaction. So let me share a few stories of what that might feel like. This is a picture of an event that the World Wildlife team and I hosted. It was a tech expo where it explored ways that technology could be used to help save wildlife in ways that hadn't been done before. Using drones to monitor habitats, using night vision goggles to identify poachers in the wild to see who's wanting to kill an animal at night without getting caught, et cetera, et cetera. There are many ideas. And so we were just doing this conference and we're getting donors and other supporters into the fold. It was so exciting. We felt like we're on to the next frontier. The energy, you just feel it in the room. It feels amazing. Love it, love it, love it. I'm going to share another example where the feel is a little bit different, still impactful. So this is a story from my days in leading data center sustainability at Google. So 101 data centers are the places that house thousands of computer servers that do all the work behind the scenes for your Google searches, your Gmail, playing your cat videos on YouTube, and that sort of thing. And so computers get hot when they run. They need to be cooled down. Water was the standard way in which we cool data centers at Google. There was this one opportunity where we identified a data center without needing to use water, and you could still cool the data center as effectively. So it would cost the same amount of money. It would be equally energy efficient, but it doesn't need any water whatsoever. And so putting on our sustainability hats here, you might think, well, that's obvious, like, duh, like, why is this even a conversation? Well, it's a conversation because there are many, many other factors to consider outside of sustainability. There are people whose lives have been dedicated to developing that design standard that says thou must use water to cool a data center. There are people who operate these facilities where they would have concerns about, well, if you do this one data center differently from the rest of the fleet, can we still maintain it, et cetera. So these are all completely valid concerns. But the reason why I bring this example is going back to the question, is sustainability core and parcel to this organization's mission? And so the types of conversations that you may think as a sustainability passionate person, it's like, that's a no-brainer. Well, those are not no-brainer conversations in some other contexts. And so the way it feels can sometimes be like, oh my gosh, like, am I really the only person in this room who thinks this way? Like, do I really have to fight this hard for something that is seemingly so obvious? But on the other hand, it feels really, really satisfying because at the end of the story, yes, we did go the Waterloo route, but it was a fight. And you're going to feel like, holy crap, that was really good, because this would not have happened if it wasn't because of me and my team and our colleagues who really saw the future and fought for it. Very different satisfaction. All right, the second question that I'm going to encourage you to think about is, do you want sustainability to be your full-time job? Now, looking at this audience, you might think, well, the fact that I'm here at this talk, the fact that I'm at the Energy Seminar, I'm at the Door School of Sustainability, well, yeah, of course I want sustainability to be my full-time job, doing it every single day, every hour. That would be pretty nice to be able to save the planet and you know, have a great job. Let's peel a little bit behind what it might mean. And I'll admit that I'm a little bit, not biased, but my point of view mostly comes from working in big companies. So in big companies, you often have a chief sustainability officer and they're a team. The key things that they're accountable for, meaning that this is, you know, what they own, are things like compliance. There are more and more sustainability-related regulations out there now, particularly in Europe, that govern things around sustainability, on disclosures, on reporting, on what you can't do, et cetera, et cetera. So the chief sustainability officer's team is often accountable for compliance with these regulations. They're also accountable for reporting. So a lot of companies you may see, they publish an annual report, sustainability, CSR report, that sort of thing. So they're also oftentimes responsible for that. They're responsible for target setting. So you often hear companies say, we strive to be a net zero company by year 2035. We're striving to get to zero waste and all that kind of stuff. So they set targets. They also identify the ways to achieve these targets. So just because you say, hey, you know, we're going to reduce our carbon and our greenhouse gas emissions by this much, by this time, you know, that's not enough. You have to figure out how you're actually going to achieve that. And so they would identify ways to figure out how to get there. So these are the typical things that they would do. On the other side, there is the main line of business. So these are the folks who oftentimes own the decisions that have real sustainability impact. So for instance, in a shoe or clothing company, you may be responsible for figuring out the materials that go into the making of those pieces of clothing. So for instance, are we going to use virgin polyester, which come from fossil fuels, or are we going to use recycled polyesters that come from recycling water bottles? And that has a real sustainability impact. It's the job of the people who are designing the product, the people responsible for the supply chain, that often own those decisions. Now, that decision-making and the process in arriving at that might be, let's say, 10, 20, 30%, I don't know, I'm making it up, of your job. It's not what you do every hour of the day. But your decisions have a real impact on the greenhouse gas emissions for the company. And so you can see here, there is a bit of a contrast where the sustainability people are often influencers and the main line of business people are often the decision makers. Now, this chart may make it look really black and white. In reality, it's a bit of a blend. It depends on the way the teams are structured and your level of influence inside the organization. So let's do another example here. This is a picture of generators inside a data center. So data centers are considered mission critical facilities. They run all the time because when you want to access your Gmail, you want to make sure it's always there. You can't even fathom the idea that it's not available. So what happens if the there's a power outage, well, we have to make sure the data centers keep running. And that is the purpose of these generators. In any case, the story that I'm painting here is there was a situation when I was leading the data center sustainability team where we identified for this one facility, we could get away without using generators and still uphold the 99.999% power reliability. And that was because of the special design, the additional redundancy that we had designed in that particular facility. And so we figured all that out. The roles of what my team and I did as compared to what my colleagues did were somewhat of the influencer versus the decision makers. So my team and I, we were definitely saying, hey, you know what? Not using diesel generators, great for the environment, reduces air pollutants, reducing the need to buy all this diesel fuel and storing it in the facility. The real decision makers were my peers on the electrical engineering team. They're the ones who are designing the power systems that go into these data centers. The decision makers were also the folks whose necks are on the line if, let's say, there is a power outage. Let's say our modeling was wrong and the data centers go out and you can't access your Gmail or you can't, place something on Google. That would be bad. It wouldn't be my job on the line. And so there's a healthy balance between the sustainability people advocating for change and then the people who are really owning the decisions. And so my question to you here as you're pondering this is, what do you think is a better fit for you in particular? Do you enjoy being that change maker, that advocate, or do you enjoy more doing that decision-making role, knowing that you're only going to spend a little bit of your time, not all of your time, thinking about sustainability? All right, the third thing is, do you want to work in a big organization or a small organization? So far, all the stories that you've heard about shoes and clothing and Google, these are all big companies, right? Global brands that everyone's heard of. What's it like to work in a smaller organization? I would say, generally speaking, smaller companies tend to be more nimble. They tend to move faster. There tend to be fewer meetings and less bureaucracy. I mean, that's a very general, overly stereotyping things, but that's generally probably true. The impact could also be smaller. So the stories that I shared with you so far, these happen, all these decisions on cooling and generators and such take place after more meetings than you can ever imagine. Just when you think, okay, I've talked to so-and-so, they're good. I've talked to so-and-so, they're good. Every moment you turn, there seems to be another group who has a say in it and who feel like they should have been involved and you didn't involve them, and you have to make them happy because that's what you do in a big company. In a smaller organization, there are just fewer people to talk to, right? So let me share an example. I serve on the board of governors at the University of Waterloo, where I went to school for my undergrad, for United College. And so my agenda as a board member is to push the college to do more sustainable things. And so with support from the school principal, we did an energy audit that looked at what are the sources for all the greenhouse gas emissions at the college. And we determined that space heating and water heating contributed the vast majority of the emissions at the college. And by the way, this is in Canada, super cold place, below freezing, for months and months of the year. And so we said, okay, well, great to know that finding. One way to solve that problem is to use electric heat pumps that are powered by low carbon power sources like hydropower, for instance, and renewables, and use that instead of using furnaces that are conventionally powered by natural gas. Okay, great conclusion. We did math, we figured out how much it would cost to pilot it, how much it would cost for a full deployment, etc. And we made a decision. Now we're piloting it. There are literally, I can probably count in my hand how many meetings we had before we got to that conclusion, and it's done. Which is amazing, right? Because progress and being able to do things and move things forward is really happy. It's a happy moment. And if we are able to solve this and deploy heat pumps for the entire college, we will reduce hundreds of tons of carbon emissions. And that's amazing. That's more than what I can possibly do, if I stay in my house all the time and don't use any power, this has much bigger impact than what I can personally ever do. So that's amazing. Now, compare that with, let's say, the carbon emissions at big companies, be it a Google or a Nike. Those emissions are literally thousands and thousands of times bigger than that at this one particular college. Just for this one example, I'm not saying that's true in all cases. And so in this particular anecdote, the things for us to think about is, would you be happy if you can move faster? You can get to decisions. You can feel and see the impact of your work. But in this particular example, the impact is smaller. So what would make you happy? All right, the fourth question for you to think about is the emotional connection important to you? So far, the things that we've been talking about, like heating and cooling and generators and all that, it's not really all that emotional, right? It's a bunch of equipment. But what if the work that you're really passionate about in sustainability positively impacts people's lives? Is it important to you to be able to see and look at the person in the eye and say, wow, I've made your life better, and that is meaningful to me? So here's an example. There's a project where I led the team to get solar panels donated to a rural village in Nepal. And we had gotten these solar panels installed with the help from the local team in Nepal as well. This was a very impoverished community of several hundred villagers who did not have access to electricity at all. They were off the grid. And in fact, to reach this village, we couldn't get there entirely by driving there because the roads ended a certain spot and then we had to walk the last mile. And so this is a very poor village, and bringing them solar panels and power literally lit up their world. Before this project came about, they did not have power at night. And so if kids wanted to read a book and study and do their homework, they would have to light a candle. And so this literally transformed people's lives. And they were so incredibly grateful. They greeted us like royalty. They did, their song and dance, and they hosted us. And it was amazing to see firsthand that, wow, for these 300 people, we have literally changed their lives. And if seeing that emotional connection is important, then I would really encourage you to seek out opportunities that allow you to do that. Because, let's say if you're working on a spreadsheet, you're working on engineering design diagrams and figuring out how to save carbon emissions, it's a very different field, right? And so what kind of level of satisfaction is meaningful to you? All right, number 5, what about money? Money matters. We all need money to pay the bills. We have student loans, we have rent to pay, mortgages to pay, we have to buy groceries, so money matters. We all want everything. Of course, we want to make a lot of money and save the planet and do all of the above. But what if you have to make a choice? What if you have 2 or 3 job offers where one is from, a well-established company, they're giving you a nice paycheck that you'll receive reliably in your bank account every 2 weeks, but you're like, I don't know how much of a change I'm going to make to the planet. So let's say that's one job offer. Let's pretend your other job offer is from a company that's much less established. Maybe it's an early stage startup that you're like, I don't know if they're going to be around 9 months' time. Or maybe you have a job offer from a government agency of sorts, and you really love the mission, you love the people, but can I pay rent on this kind of salary? And these are all really real questions. You're the only person who can answer that. For me, I think you know what choice I had made. I wanted to do all of the above, and so I was lucky to have really amazing jobs at these, admired companies, and I wanted to take it farther. And so I volunteered, I served on boards with all these nonprofits and such to hopefully amplify my impact. And so that's something that you have to think about. A few more things that I would encourage you to think in the back of your mind. So one thought is setbacks are going to happen. here I am, chatting with you. You all are immensely talented. You have, I'm sure, gotten top grades, led all these school clubs and sports and all of that stuff, which is why you're here. And so you may feel this fear of failure. I know I've had it all my life. When I was contemplating my career change 15 years ago, that was my biggest fear. What if I were to take on a sustainability job and it just didn't matter? Like, what if I just do something that's insignificant in the end? That would suck. And that was my worst fear in my life. And I want to say, I'm older than you. I have had so many setbacks in my life. I've shared a few here on this slide. So let me talk about them. There was one time that I fought really hard for a change that would make data centers more sustainable, that would use significantly less water in a place that was located in the middle of a desert. And I was like, we have got to do this thing. I've got the formula for you. It's all worked out. Here's the plan. Here's how much it's going to cost. This is what it's going to mean. Like, it's all laid out. And I fought and fought and fought for it. This happened over months and months. In the end, it got spectacularly rejected. And I was devastated. Not only because it didn't get accepted, I was actually also dinged on it in my performance review. So, whereas I had always, up until that point, gotten an exceeds expectations performance rating, for this thing, it was downgraded to a meet expectations. And I was like, what the bleep? And it was because I had pushed so hard that it made some people uncomfortable. So that was a setback. And of course, I decided to change jobs after that, or at least change departments. Another example of a setback, it was 2020, right at the start of COVID. My manager asked me to come into the office one day on no notice, which is always bad news. Well, usually bad news. And he's like, hey, listen, I'm so sorry, but your role is eliminated. You have 2 months to look for a new job. And if you can't find a new job inside the company, this is the severance package that you're going to get. And I'm like, wait, what? Because I've been doing a really pretty good job up until that time. And it was hella scary. We were at the start of the pandemic. The world was falling over. Nobody was hiring. I'm like, how am I supposed to find a job in 2 months' time when there's hiring freezes all over the place? Well, I survived. I didn't die. And I ended up getting a few offers. But it was really, really scary. I had another situation where my boss, who had brought me into the company, he was the biggest champion of sustainability. He loved me. He was so supportive of my career. He would remove all roadblocks for me and my team all the time, invite me to meet with all these amazing leaders at the company, and it was amazing. And one day I learned, without notice, he got laid off that day. Again, I was like, oh my God, is this my life over in this company? What am I going to do? Really, really scary. I can give you another long list of these types of examples. The point here is setbacks will happen, and especially for things like sustainability, where a lot of times it is not the main line of the business about, okay, how we're going to make more money, how we're going to increase our profit margin, how we're going to get more customers, how we're going to win market share and things like that. Setbacks will happen no matter what field you're in. And so my suggestion to you is to expect that it will happen, but you're going to take it in stride. You're going to take care of your mental health, and you're going to know that work is not all there is in life, even though I'm sure that we're in a room full of overachievers where we think, oh my God, what am I going to do if I fail? It's okay. It's going to be okay. There's other parts of life. The other parting thought that I'll share with you is to prioritize relationships. Working with people who you like and respect is really important. So let's say you've answered all the questions that we talked about earlier. You found this amazing job. They're going to pay you a lot of money. You're going to change the world. You love everything about it. Ask yourself, do I like and respect the people who I work with every single day? Because they're going to make or break your day. There's a saying that says, people join companies, but they leave managers. And so cultivating your relationship with your manager is really important. And I will say that your manager is one of the most important people in your life because they have a real impact on your happiness on a daily basis. So anyway, I'm going to wrap up here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to share a few suggestions from what I've learned over the years. And I want to say that you all here, you're incredibly talented, you're smart, you're motivated, you're energized, you have a superpower. And I hope that you can apply your superpower in ways that will make you happy and change the world. So if you want to stay in touch, there's my LinkedIn. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Winnie, that was actually much more than I expected. I expected all the things you've done to inform you, but that was actually also a master class on organization theory, business school person here, entrepreneurship, organization theory, interpersonal dynamics, and life happiness. So thank you again. Any questions, comments?
Yeah, questions from the audience.
Yeah,
Great. I'm going to come.
define the term sustainability.
So the question was,
And Google, in their initiative or project, you're using diesel generators is certainly not a part of a sustainability related solution. So please define the term.
yeah. So the question was, can you define the term sustainability? That's a great question. I think sustainability is very broad ranging. I think oftentimes when people think about sustainability, it's the main categories like it's carbon emissions, it's water consumption, it's air pollution, it's human health, and et cetera, et cetera. To your comment about how diesel generators are not very sustainable or clean, et cetera, I completely agree. We can go into another class about why those were selected in the first place to do the job that they were designed to do. And in this particular case, it's really to provide reliable backup power. If you look at alternative solutions to achieving that solution, there are things like batteries. You could do natural gas generators, which are still somewhat dirty, less emitting compared to diesel. Batteries is cleaner, but more expensive and tend to be shorter ranging. And so there are a bunch of trade-offs that come into play, not only for sustainability, but cost and the duration of how long those technologies can last through a power outage. Good question.
Amazing. Yes, we had a question here and then over there, and I was going to plug, if you guys haven't heard about a Stanford startup called Mainspring, super cool company, but it's a linear generator that's fuel agnostic.
They've been here also.
Yeah, they've been here. Everybody's been here. This is a great class. Did you still have a question? Amazing.
It's clear that you've had a really successful career and it sounds very fulfilling. Do you have qualities that you attribute to success, and what would you advise us to be doing when we look for job opportunities, and how do we stand out during that process?
That's a really great question.
What is your superpower? What is your superpower?
Oh, I don't know that I can give an answer that would be really satisfactory. So I would think along two main dimensions. The first dimension I would call hard skills. So hard skills being like, let's say, engineering or economics or, chemistry or whatever. So like a defined area where you're doing something that is needed to solve a particular problem. And then I would say the second category would be soft skills. So these are all do you work well with others? Can you negotiate? Can you get to a yes, even though there are people disagreeing? Can you lead a team? Can you manage your boss and make them happy? That whole kind of class of skills. I think as I look back in my career, I've done some good things. If I were to do it all over again, I think I would pivot harder on the first category. So I did my undergrad in systems design engineering, which is really for people who don't know what they want to do. So, during that program, we took courses on electrical, industrial, chemical, physics, like the whole thing, right? And so it's basically about procrastinating what you really want to do when you grow up. And so I never quite grew up from that engineering discipline. And I think if I had to do it all over again, I would harden my skills in that space so that, it gives me an even stronger complementary set of skills with the other soft skills that I've developed over the years.
Over here, and then I'll come to you.
This is more of a technical question. I think it's rather interesting what we're able to do with the data centers. So
can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. So water's known as a good coolant. I'm just kind of curious how you were able to really replace water or replace the necessary parts of the system to actually ensure proper heat transfer.
Great question. So there are, broadly speaking, a number of different ways that you could do cooling. So there's evaporative cooling, which has been the standard design at those data centers, where you are running pipes to pick up the heat emitted by these computer servers. You're sending and you're putting water in those pipes that pick up the heat. Then you send that heated water to a set of cooling towers. The cooling towers evaporate water. And then when you are evaporating water, you end up with water that's cooler because you have released that heat, if you will. And then you put that water through the system again. So that's evaporative cooling. To your question about, okay, so how did we do it for that particular facility? It's because of the climate conditions at that facility in Ireland, where the climate tends to be fairly moderate throughout the year. And so in that example, we're able to do direct air cooling. It's kind of analogous to you opening the windows on a cool spring day. And so just by moving that relatively cool air throughout the facility throughout the day, we're able to achieve the cooling desired. Now, that type of cooling technology is not applicable in all climate conditions. So if, let's say, you're in the southeastern United States in the summertime, where it's really hot and humid, that kind of cooling method would not work. And so that's just an example, and there are many other cooling methods that folks explore to achieve this.
Here in the...
You mentioned how you were working on a sustainability initiative for a very long time, only for it to get rejected, right? And I'm curious what you would do differently now that you've challenged something that's been very traditional. It's been the status quo for a very long time, and what you would recommend us to do in procedures as well as industries that have been around for a very long time and have very established processes.
That's a really great question. I think there are two parts to that question. There is challenging industries, and then there is challenging people. And I think those are very different things. So let me address the people portion first. Your question of kind of what would I do differently? I think if I were to go back in time, if I could do it all over again, I would get a much better read as to what other people's receptivity is. And so if I were able to gauge, okay, you know what, this person is being pushed too hard and they're feeling uncomfortable, I think I would move back more. I think at that time, part of my rationale, ill-informed in hindsight, is, you know what, I'm just going to go all in because, what do I have to lose? Well, apparently I did have something to lose. And I didn't realize it at the time. And so I would just, do a better read on people in future. I think the other portion of your question, which is, if you're challenging established industries, I would figure out ways that you could win by changing, let's say, industry dynamics. So are you, let's say, coming up with a solution that can solve some fundamental problem, but at a lower cost so that it is not only good for sustainability, but also good for whatever it is? So, maybe we can talk offline about what problem area space you may be thinking about. But I think there are definitely many moments and many degrees of freedom where you can make change, and you don't always have to go head to head to the person who's going to say no to you, especially if you're wanting to change an industry. But let's get into more specifics. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Winnie, for the great seminar. Can you please comment on the effectiveness of exploring the space for the Earth's sustainability. With full respect, I heard that some scholars saying our society only spend about 1% resource on space compared to on environment. Thank you, Winnie.
So let me make sure I understand your question. So you want to understand how we're allocating resources on sustainability as compared to other things like space exploration?
Correct. Yeah, because some I guess what they assume is on the space in space we could find more resources. So they say like we could find a 10,000 Earths, but we focus on one Earth. That kind of a theory. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
The frontier ethic.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I don't know that I have a really good answer on that. I feel like in my world, and to be honest, I'm not really thinking about space just because I'm so heads down. It's like, okay, like how are we going to make the next shoe, the next piece of clothing, etc. But I think you bring up a good question. I don't know. I think the only thing that I'll say is, if your question is about government funding, for instance, like how does the government decide to spend, this many billions on space and this much on sustainability? One thing I've learned about budgeting in a big organization is that it's a lot about what did we do last year. So, last year this department got this much money. Well, so they're going to fight tooth and nail to get more money next year. Everyone does that. And so it really depends on, who's able to make the case for why they should get more money. And who's able to make those arguments that resonate with the decision maker. So I think that's probably all I can say on that topic for now.
Okay, students, any more questions? Yeah.
So parenthetically, you may know, and you all may know, there is a lot of work going on now to develop a sustainability program for all of you, which could be a new major, could be part of existing majors, could be certificate programs, minors, and whatnot. But the one thing that stuck out, because I've been lucky enough to work with 300 or 400 undergrads and see where they went, which is truly the best part of this kind of job, is you get to see people do different things, and like you, maybe not quite like you, they do things, and some are successful and some are not. One thing I got fed back in the question of what would you have done differently, oftentimes it's kind of the other side of your deep knowledge and engineering fundamentals thing, and that is design thinking. A lot of people say we got really good at chemistry and EE or computer science, but we felt like in the world where we're trying to be change makers, entrepreneurs, and whatnot, that design thinking is good. So would you put in a plug for that being, so maybe you felt you could have got more engineering fundamentals, and then the design is maybe, in the parlance of the day, kind of a capstone kind of a situation. Is that something you would recommend or wish you had available when you went through it? So maybe your design thinking classes would have more meaning to you if you had done a little deeper dive on fundamentals?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I would definitely agree with that. I think in the journey that I've taken, I've definitely benefited from understanding that integrated design thinking. A lot of these things that we saw here, let's say cooling, it is very interdisciplinary between mechanical engineering people, between, sustainability people, between the operations people, between the R&D people, et cetera. And so a lot of this stuff is very interdisciplinary. And I think and that's how we work in the modern workplace. There is very rarely that I see there's a team that only does their thing and they don't work with anyone else. So I think you're spot on there, John.
Well, did you have a question? I have a business school question, but. Oh, you don't? Okay. So this I can relate to Google. So I know a lot of people who have gone and worked for X. So for you, when you were at Google, were they a competitor, ally? and whatnot. You probably know the different groups. I know, for example, the DeepMind group did a lot of work on data centers, which you're probably well aware of. So you could generalize that in the business school sense, and there are some people in the business school that do this internal corporate venturing, which is a much smaller scale version of Google X, where you say, okay, we realize we're set in our ways, the people are set in their ways, the budget is set in their ways, but we're going to have it's sometimes called a skunk. I was a space program guy for a while, a skunk works to work out new innovative ideas. And then you have to have a champion that says, well, we know you can do the old things well, but you may be missing, you may be too short-sighted. You may be, penny wise and pound foolish in the long run, which is something someone like you might say. So did you find that kind of arrangement with big Google, Alphabet, whatever, and Google X to be useful? And can you generalize that to other organizations you've been involved in, including Nike?
Yeah, I think it is useful. I think the team dynamics are very different depending on where exactly you sit in the organization. And so for those of you who may not be familiar, X is this moonshot factory. So they do all kinds of innovative R&D stuff, really out there types of exploration.
DeepMind, Waymo, etc.
Exactly.
All kind of X companies.
Right. And so I definitely experienced synergies with that team because there was a project that they had explored to do with clean energy that we were like, oh my gosh, that sounds super cool. Can we pilot that at the data centers? We'll be your first point of pilot. It's easy. You don't have to deal with all the legalities. And so that was really great. But I will say this, if you were on the data center R&D team, then you're like, these people are threatening to me because my job is R&D within the data center department. And so the team dynamics are interesting. And so back to John's comment about design thinking, the whole, and back to, this gentleman's question earlier, like having those soft skills and seeing the integrated approach to how to solve all these things is really critical to making progress.
Great. With that said, I think we're just about out of time. So thank you, Winnie, as well.